They used my house for their wedding. My house. They didn't ask. They didn't even tell me. I found out through an Instagram post. I was on my lunch break when I saw it, my cousin's fiancé, standing on the porch I built, holding a champagne flute in front of a banner that read "Forever Starts at Evergreen Ridge." The problem? Evergreen Ridge wasn't some venue. It was the name I carved into the cedar beam above my front steps 6 years ago. It was mine. The photo had 1,000 likes. My name had none. That was the moment something broke. Not loud or messy, just a click, like a deadbolt shifting inside me. For 15 years, I'd been the one who kept quiet, who let things slide because family is complicated. I let my sister borrow money without payback. I let my aunt insult my job and call it a phase. I even let my mother drain the small inheritance my real father left me to invest in Julia's future. I didn't say a word. But this was different. They'd used what I built to tell their own story, and they hadn't even invited me into the background. I scrolled through the rest of the photos, my deck covered in string lights I didn't put up, furniture rearranged, walls repainted. The reading nook I spent 2 winters crafting was now a dessert table. My bookshelf had been removed entirely. They'd even replaced the doormat. The caption read, "A legacy of love, passed down through generations." So grateful to Aunt Carol and Uncle Dan for entrusting us with this piece of family history. Legacy. That word hit like a punch. No one entrusted them with anything. There had been no conversation, no document, no request. Just quiet entitlement and a family that assumed my silence was a signature. I left work early. I drove straight to the cabin, unsure of what I'd find. Part of me half expected someone to be there, grinning with a clipboard and a camera crew. But the driveway was empty. Still, something felt off the moment I stepped onto the porch. The key slid in slower than usual. The door opened to a space I barely recognized. Gone were the old photo frames, the hand-painted welcome sign, the throw pillows my late mother had stitched when I bought the place. In their place? Mass-market prints and generic slogans like "Home is where the heart is." They hadn't just used the cabin. They'd tried to rewrite it. In the kitchen, a stack of empty champagne glasses sat by the sink. Someone had been here recently. My house still smelled like cheap cologne and lemon polish. I opened the cabinet and saw mugs labeled Bride Tribe. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I recorded. Every room. Every change. Every sign of erasure. Then I opened my safe. Inside were all the documents. Title deed, property tax records, purchase agreements, each one in my name. No co-owners. No joint signature. No mistake. The next morning, I called a friend from law school. Her name was Elise. We hadn't talked in months, but she picked up on the second ring. "What happened?" she asked. I didn't even explain. I just said, "I think they're planning to take it." Quietly. Permanently. Elise's voice sharpened. "Tell me everything." I laid it out. The party, the photos, the caption about legacy, the gradual removal of my identity from the property. Elise didn't interrupt. When I was done, she said, "We need to flag the title immediately. If they're trying to claim ownership without a transfer, they'll either forge something or try to get you to sign it without realizing." "I'd never signed something like that," I said. She hesitated. "You might have already." A fake power of attorney. Or maybe they're counting on you not noticing until it's too late. It sounded paranoid. Until it didn't. That evening, I called my Aunt Carol. Straight to voicemail. Then Julia. Same thing. Finally, my mother picked up. "Rachel," she said, as if I'd caught her in the middle of something important. "You've seen the photos, I assume." "You used my house for a wedding," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Without asking." She didn't apologize. She sighed. "You don't even use it that often. And Julia's getting married. You know how hard things have been for her. That doesn't make it yours to give." She paused. "Rachel, don't be dramatic. It's a family property. We've all invested in it emotionally." Emotionally. They contributed nothing but commentary and expectations. I worked overtime for 10 years to afford that land. Laid flooring with my own hands. Skipped holidays to build something that belonged to me. Now it was a prop for someone else's happy ending. "Elise is filing a cease and desist," I said. If anything changes on the title, I'll know. And I'll act. A beat of silence. I always hoped you'd be more generous, she said coldly. I replied. You mistook it for surrender. I hung up. That was day one. And I wasn't done. By the end of the week, Elise had filed a property alert with the county recorder's office. Any change to the deed, even an inquiry, would trigger a notification. We weren't being paranoid, we were being realistic. I knew my family. If they were bold enough to use my house for a wedding without asking, they were bold enough to go further. 2 days later, the first alert came in. An unfamiliar lender had submitted a title inquiry. Not a major bank, something small and regional. Elise called them, posing as my legal representative. She asked why they were reviewing ownership on a private property. The man on the other end hesitated, then casually mentioned they were following up on preliminary paperwork from a co-owner. There is no co-owner, Elise said. This property is solely owned by Rachel Morgan. Any claim otherwise is fraudulent. He said he'd escalate the matter. Then he hung up. That same night, I got a text from my cousin Megan. Hey, saw something weird. Thought you should know. Attached was a screenshot of a lifestyle blog. A bright, curated article titled, Lake Legacy, How One Couple is Honoring Family by Restoring a Historic Retreat. The photos were worse this time, professional, airbrushed. Julia and her fiancé standing on the deck, arms around each other, talking about the history of the place. They called it Julia's childhood refuge. She never set foot there until 2 years ago. I scrolled to the bottom of the article and froze. A single line buried in the credits. Property transferred to the Davenport family, per family trust. Family trust? There was no trust. I would have known. Elise confirmed it the next morning. They're bluffing, she said. There's no legal trust. But the article paints a picture. Public narratives can soften resistance before a real attempt to transfer ownership. It's strategy. I knew that look Julia wore in the photos. The calm confidence of someone who'd already decided the story was hers to tell. We moved quickly. Elise drafted a cease and desist letter, formally declaring me as the sole legal owner and warning against further public misrepresentation. It wasn't aggressive, just clear. We mailed copies to Julia, her fiancé, my mother, and the blog itself. Certified. Tracked. 3 days passed. No one responded. Then a new email arrived. It was from a paralegal at a firm I didn't recognize. The subject line read, Evergreen Ridge, Ownership Clarification. I almost deleted it, until I saw the thread it had been forwarded from. Someone had added my name by accident. There, in plain text, was everything, a thread discussing how and when to finalize a quitclaim deed. A plan to backdate it. A note that read, once the engagement party's done, we'll move forward quietly. She's unlikely to contest. They were planning to take it. Officially. I called Elise. We have enough, she said. Not just for a cease and desist. We can file an injunction to block any transfer attempts. She was calm, but I could hear the steel under her words. By Friday, we had everything gathered, property records, alerts, screenshots, the blog article, even a printout of that email chain. We walked into the county clerk's office like it was a courtroom. Elise handed over the file, explained the situation clearly, misrepresentation, forged authority, intent to transfer without consent. The clerk stamped the paperwork without comment. You're good, she said. It felt underwhelming. I wanted something louder, something that matched the storm I'd been carrying inside. But this was the right kind of quiet, the kind that held weight. Back at home, I reviewed the old property documents again. Every page. Every signature. My name was there in black ink again and again. Yet somehow, they had convinced themselves that what I'd built didn't count because I didn't brag about it. I wasn't in any family group chats anymore. I hadn't been invited to Julia's bridal shower. I was, it seemed, inconvenient. But I wasn't invisible. I went online and posted a photo of the original blueprint for the cabin, my handwritten notes in the margins, the date circled at the top. I didn't add any context. Just the caption, designing your life doesn't mean asking permission. No hashtags. No callouts. The comments came slowly. A few friends, some coworkers, one former professor. No one from my family. Then Megan texted again. They're freaking out. Aunt Carol called me sobbing. I didn't reply. Let them spin. 3 days later, the blog quietly removed the article. No retraction. NOI thought the worst of it was over. The cease and desist had been delivered. The blog post was quietly taken down. Elise had filed the injunction, and for a brief, fleeting moment, I believed silence meant surrender. But I should have known better. Silence in my family wasn't an ending. It was the part where they started plotting again. It was a Tuesday morning when I opened my inbox and saw the alert. New filing activity, Evergreen Ridge. My stomach turned before I even clicked it. The update came from a loan servicing agency I'd never heard of. The document attached was titled Ownership Transfer, Supporting Documents. I forwarded it to Elise immediately. She called me 20 minutes later. They forged a power of attorney, she said. Her voice was clipped. Dated last year. Notarized. But the signature, Rachel, it's not even close to yours. I opened the scan. My name was there. But the handwriting had no rhythm, no familiarity. The loops on the R were too round. My actual signature always ended in a sharp downturn. This one curled like someone was guessing. They backdated it to last September, Elise continued. Which would mean they've been planning this longer than we thought. I didn't speak. I couldn't. There's more, she said. The notary they used is under review for unrelated misconduct. That gives us a way in. If we can prove the document was fabricated. We don't prove it, I interrupted. We expose it. That afternoon, we filed a formal fraud complaint with the county's civil division. Elise included the forged power of attorney, the notary record, and the evidence we had from the earlier email thread. We updated the injunction to reflect not just attempted misrepresentation, but now verified document fraud. I didn't tell my mother. I didn't call Julia. I didn't warn them. I wanted the paperwork to arrive like thunder. The next 72 hours were quiet. But not in the peaceful way. At night, I couldn't sleep. My brain kept rerunning every family dinner, every moment I swallowed my voice. I remembered the time Julia borrowed my laptop for college applications and returned it wiped clean. Or the Christmas when my mother gave her a bracelet that used to belong to our grandmother, one I was promised. These weren't accidents. They were rehearsal. That Friday, Elise sent me a text, check your email. Jenkins came through. Paul Jenkins. My old neighbor from Evergreen Ridge. I opened the file. A grainy video, timestamped from about 6 weeks ago. The angle was from his driveway, pointed toward my front porch. It wasn't high definition, but it didn't need to be. It showed my mother, my sister, and Julia's fiancé handing a set of keys to an older man, Gideon's father, I guessed. There was audio. Muffled but audible. My mother's voice. She won't be a problem. Rachel's always been polite. The word snapped like a twig. That had always been their justification. Politeness. They relied on my willingness to let things go. To be quiet. To not make a scene. For years, I believed it was strength. Now I knew it had been their cover. I sent the footage to Elise. No caption. She replied within the hour, let's bury them in paper. We went wide. Filed a second cease and desist. Submitted the video as supplemental evidence in the fraud complaint. Reached out to the Lifestyle blog's legal department. Sent a copy of the forged document to the State Bar Ethics Review, noting the attorney's name involved in the title transfer discussion. Elise had contacts there. Every action was documented. Every move, traceable. Then we filed a public reaffirmation of ownership, my name, my deed, notarized and submitted in triplicate to the county clerk's office. We made it unignorable. The final step was the hardest, the family. I printed a single copy of the forged power of attorney and mailed it directly to my mother's address. No letter. No note. Just the fake signature she thought I'd never notice. 3 days later, I got a call. Blocked number. I let it go to voicemail. The message was short. Rachel, it's your mother. I think we need to talk. Things have gotten out of hand. I didn't call back. Instead, I pulled out the folder where I kept the original deed, flipped to the page with my signature, and held it up beside the forgery. The difference was undeniable. The truth had a shape. And now I had proof. I wasn't angry anymore. I was ready. The invitation came in a group text. Family dinner. Friday. No drama, just food. It was signed by my mother, as if that would mean anything now. But it wasn't the text that caught me off guard. It was the image attached. A long dining table. 16 chairs. Lilies in a glass vase. Lilies were my late grandmother's favorite. The one person in our family who never asked me to shrink myself. She used to say, silence is only noble when it's chosen, not expected. I stared at the photo for a long minute, then typed a reply. I'll come. I arrived on time. I always did. The house was filled with voices, but they quieted when I stepped in. I recognized the look, tight smiles, lowered eyes, unfinished sentences. My mother stood at the head of the table. Julia was next to her, posture perfect. Gideon offered a flat nod. My seat was at the far end, next to an uncle who once told me I was too intense to be likable. Dinner went exactly as I expected, pleasant on the surface, hollow beneath. Roasted chicken. Overcooked asparagus. Nervous laughter. Everyone performing unity like it was a script, except I'd stopped auditioning for this role. Then, midway through dessert, my mother stood. She tapped her spoon to her glass. We've had misunderstandings lately, she began, voice warm, but tonight is about healing. About moving forward as a family. The word family landed with a thud. I let her continue. She spoke about legacy. About trust. About not letting petty things divide us. I felt eyes drift toward me but didn't look up. Then she paused, clearly waiting for applause or approval. Neither came. I stood slowly, pulling the small flash drive from my coat pocket. I didn't say a word. Just walked to the television mounted on the wall and plugged it in. The screen lit up. Audio only. Clear. Unedited. She won't be a problem. Rachel's always been polite. My mother's voice undeniable. Then Julia. Once the party's over, we'll move forward. She won't fight. She never does. The room froze. Chairs shifted. Forks stopped. One of the cousins whispered something I didn't catch. Then my voice, recorded from my call with Elise, played back with surgical clarity. You may tell any story you like. Just don't use what I built to tell it. I turned to face the table. You didn't just try to take my house, I said. You tried to rewrite me out of my own life. You forged my name. You called it family legacy. You called it love. Silence. I looked at Julia. You had a photographer. A blog deal. A script. All before you had the nerve to call me. I turned to my mother. And you. You stood on my porch, handed my keys to a man I've never met, and said I wouldn't be a problem. Her mouth opened slightly. I didn't let her speak. You were right. I didn't fight before. I let it go. Over and over. When you spent my college fund on Julia's tuition. When you turned my bedroom into a guest room without asking. When you laughed at my business and called it a phase. Now I let the silence settle. You thought my quiet was weakness. It wasn't. It was discipline. Still no one moved. I walked back to my seat. Sat down. Calm. You don't have to apologize, I said. You don't even have to admit what you did. Because now there's a record. There's a court date. There's a file with your signatures and mine. And unlike yours, mine is real. Gideon reached for his wine like it might make him disappear. Julia stared down at her plate. My mother's face was unreadable, but she didn't argue. The show was over. I didn't wait for dessert. The next morning, I drove to Evergreen Ridge. Alone. No music. No calls. Just the sound of gravel under tires. When I stepped inside, I didn't inspect or document. I just stood still. The fake throw pillows were gone. The mugs had been moved. A box sat in the hallway labeled Julia, miscellaneous. It hadn't even been taped shut. They'd started backing off. Quietly. Strategically. I walked to the back porch and stared at the lake. This place had been the only thing I ever built without compromise. It didn't matter what they posted or who they convinced. I still had the original blueprints. The tax records. The receipts. I had the truth. They forged signatures. I forged boundaries. Later that week, I got a letter from the county. The fraud complaint had been accepted for review. The notary who signed the forged POA had been suspended. The attorney who facilitated the ownership clarification was under investigation. No headlines. No drama. Just consequences. Exactly how I wanted it. It took 10 days for the county to finalize the freeze on the property. 10 days from the moment we submitted the fraud packet, the forged signature, the notary suspension, and the supporting evidence from Paul's camera. 10 days of legal weight shifting back into my hands. On the 11th day, I got the call. Transfer activity blocked. You're the sole legal owner. Case file flagged. Nothing moves without your explicit signature, Elise said. Her voice was calm, but I could hear the satisfaction underneath. She wasn't celebrating for me, she was witnessing closure. I didn't cheer. I didn't cry. I just exhaled. The silence I'd once feared now felt clean. Later that afternoon, I drove out to the cabin with a single purpose, not to inspect, not to assess, but to be present. The front steps were exactly where I left them. The door still opened with my key, no resistance. Inside, it was quiet. There was a box left in the guest room, half-packed, labeled Family Archive. I didn't open it. I just moved it to the porch, left it there like a delivery no one had claimed. Then I went back inside and locked the door. I didn't reclaim the house out of anger. I reclaimed it because it was the one thing in my life no one helped me build, but everyone had tried to use. It had started as a dream. Land no one wanted. Foundation poured after weekends of overtime. I learned to install drywall by watching tutorials at midnight. I picked every fixture myself, not because I wanted compliments, but because it felt like control in a life where so many choices were made for me. And when it was done, I thought it would finally be enough. That if I built something solid, they'd respect the boundary. Instead, they treated it like an open invitation. Until I closed the door. That evening, I opened a drawer I hadn't touched in years. Inside was a disposable camera. Still unused. I had bought it when the garden was still a dream. Before everything got repurposed, renamed. I walked out to the back porch. The sun was low, stretching gold across the lake. I set the timer, placed the camera on the railing, and sat down in the porch chair with a cup of coffee. No posing. No performance. The shutter clicked. Just once. Just enough. The photo went online 3 days later. No caption at first. No hashtags. Just the image. Me on the porch, back straight, cup in hand, the lake behind me. The comments started slow. Then I added one line. Some things aren't lost. They're reclaimed. That post did more than anything else I'd said or filed. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was final. It closed a door on a version of me they all thought still lived in silence. I started hearing from people I hadn't spoken to in years. Quiet messages. Saw your post. I remember when you first bought the land. Good on you. Even Megan texted, just 2 words, you won. But it never felt like a win. It felt like release. The official apology came in the form of a card. My mother didn't call. She didn't visit. Just a handwritten note on heavy paper. We all make mistakes. I hope time softens this. No signature. Just her name printed in the corner. I didn't respond. Not out of spite. But because for the first time, I didn't need her recognition to validate my existence. Julia removed every post about the cabin from her profile. The blog issued a correction buried in the footer of the original article. An earlier version misstated ownership details. We regret the error. There was no retraction. No accountability. But I didn't need it. In the weeks that followed, I quietly restored what had been altered. I repainted the walls. Took down their stage decor. Not out of revenge, but because I wanted the space to stop lying. I found the quilt my grandmother made, still stored in a sealed bag under the bed, and laid it over the arm of the couch. Some things weren't ruined. Just buried. One afternoon, while sorting a box marked miscellaneous, I found a letter I hadn't read in years. My grandmother's handwriting, neat, always firm. If you ever feel like they're not listening, don't speak louder. Just stop explaining. Live so clearly they have no choice but to see you. It was the only advice I needed. The last thing I changed was the name on the wooden beam above the front steps. Years ago, I'd carved Evergreen Ridge as a quiet nod to new beginnings. But they'd taken that, turned it into branding, a prop. So I sanded it down. Not completely, just enough to remove what no longer belonged. And then I recarved it. Morgan House. Not flashy. Not sentimental. Just honest. My name. My boundary. My beginning this time, without permission. It took months before the silence stopped feeling like something was missing. At first, every quiet morning at the cabin felt temporary, like I was waiting for the next intrusion. A knock on the door, a text disguised as a truce, a new article pretending none of it happened. But none came. What came instead was stillness. The kind that didn't need to be filled. There were no court hearings. No drawn-out legal battles. Just the steady progression of documents being processed, flagged, corrected. Elise kept me updated in short emails. Notary barred. Case file closed. No further filings. It ended the way most real victories do, not with applause, but with paperwork. I stayed at the cabin full-time. Not out of defiance, but because it finally felt like the place belonged to someone who did too. I changed the locks. I re-registered the address under a new LLC. I removed myself from every family thread and blocked every number that used to send me birthday messages 2 days late. It wasn't dramatic. It was clean. That was the real shift. I stopped waiting to be included in something I never belonged to in the first place. A few weeks later, I got a letter from Megan. Handwritten. No return address. "I'm sorry I stayed quiet," she wrote. "You were right. We all saw it. We just assumed you wouldn't fight." She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't try to explain. That made it easier to accept. I didn't reply, but I kept the letter. Proof that someone else saw what I did, and finally said it out loud. One morning, I opened the storage cabinet near the back door and found the toolbox I hadn't used since construction. Inside were the old blueprint drafts, coffee-stained and folded too many times. I took them out and laid them flat on the table. There, in my handwriting, was every measurement, every revision, every change. Not one of them made with anyone else in the room. I had designed every inch of this place alone. And still they tried to claim it as a family heirloom. But heirs don't get to inherit what they never helped build. The news eventually stopped talking about the Lake Legacy article. The lifestyle blog quietly updated their editorial standards. They didn't contact me again. Julia's wedding went ahead, but at another venue. No photos were posted. No coverage. Her feed turned quiet. I wondered if she knew how close she'd come to getting what she wanted. If the forged signature had slipped through unnoticed, if the timing had been slightly different, if I hadn't checked that email alert when I did. It wasn't justice that saved me. It was paying attention. That, and the fact that I finally stopped giving people the benefit of the doubt just because we shared blood. Some evenings, I walked the edge of the lake with a notebook. Not to write anything poetic, just to observe what was real. The slope of the hill. The way the light hit the water. What stayed? What left? I made lists. Not goals, not dreams, just truths. What's mine? What never was? What I won't give away again. No names were on those pages. Only boundaries. One weekend, Elise visited. We didn't talk about the case. We didn't have to. She sat on the porch with me, both of us sipping coffee as the sun settled behind the ridge. "You know," she said, "most people wouldn't have handled it the way you did." "What way is that?" "Without burning everything down." I nodded once. They lit the match. I just made sure the truth survived. We didn't say anything else for a while. The quiet felt earned. Months passed. Then a year. I filed the final paperwork to remove a shared family claim from the property's historical file. I wanted no trace of the myth they tried to build. Not because I needed to erase them, but because they'd never belonged in that story to begin with. On the anniversary of the day I bought the land, I took another photo. Same porch. Same chair. Different version of me. This one didn't explain. This one didn't wait to be asked. This one knew that reclaiming your life isn't about fighting harder. It's about deciding who doesn't get access to it anymore. There was no grand message at the end. No forgiveness ceremony. No tearful reunion. Just truth. Boundaries. Ownership. And peace that didn't ask to be approved. 1 year after I reclaimed the house, I received an envelope in the mail. No return address. Just my name, printed in careful letters, like someone wasn't sure if they wanted me to open it. Inside was a photo. Me, standing on the porch. The one I took on the camera timer that evening, the lake behind me, mug in hand. It had been reposted and shared so many times I barely thought of it as mine anymore. But on the back, someone had written, "This is the version of you we never expected, but maybe always feared." No name. No explanation. I didn't need one. I set the photo down and didn't touch it again for days. Not because I was unsettled, but because I finally understood what they meant. They hadn't been afraid of my anger. They'd been afraid of my clarity. Clarity was dangerous to people who built their power on your doubt. And for years, I had played my role well. The reliable one. The reasonable one. The one who didn't ask for too much, didn't take up too much space, didn't disrupt the balance, even when the balance was rigged. But all it took was one refusal. One line drawn without apology. After that, the power shifted. Not loudly. Not instantly. Just permanently. There's a kind of freedom in knowing you won't explain yourself again. It's not revenge. Not really. It's refusal. Refusal to shrink. Refusal to excuse. Refusal to be edited out. That became my compass. I no longer replied to messages that arrived only when someone needed to save face. I stopped entertaining calls that came from guilt instead of care. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing next because no one needed to be included just to feel better about how it ended. I renovated the house again, but this time for myself, not to undo what others had done. I didn't restore it back to how it was. I made new decisions. Not sentimental ones. Not symbolic. Just choices rooted in the present. I turned one of the spare rooms into a small workspace. I planted the garden I never got around to. I started walking the ridge trail in the mornings, not because I was training for anything, but because movement reminded me I was still choosing this life every day. Not recovering it. Not surviving it. Living it. One evening, I got a call from Elise. The notary had been disbarred. The firm involved in the forged title transfer had quietly settled with the state. Julia's name had been removed from any historical association with the cabin. No one contested the filing, Elise said. They let it go. I thanked her. Not just for the legal work, but for not needing me to explain why it mattered so much. I didn't just want my name on paper, I told her. I wanted my life back. You never lost it, she said. They just blurred the edges. You redrew them. Months passed. I didn't mark the anniversaries. I didn't repost the story. I didn't need reminders. What mattered was that I now woke up with no tightness in my chest, no rehearsed justifications in my throat, no imagined arguments playing on loop. One morning, I walked to the mailbox and found another envelope. Inside, a short card. Just 5 words. We didn't win. You did. No name. But this time I laughed. Not bitter. Not smug. Just tired of waiting for people to be braver with their truth. Because it was never about winning. It was about being seen. About not being edited out of your own history because someone else told a louder version. People ask me now if I ever forgave them. The real answer? I stopped needing to. Forgiveness, when forced, is just another form of erasure. A rushed ending that makes everyone else more comfortable. I didn't forgive. I released. I released the need to fix the story for people who were never going to see me as more than convenient silence. The cabin isn't a symbol anymore. It's not about legacy or proof or even pride. It's just a place I live, a place I claimed, protected, and now choose every day. That's the power no one can take, choosing to stay in your own story. That's not vengeance. It's freedom.